Greetings, one and all. I hope you're well. High-end microphones and diminishing returns. I'm using the Ethos in this position today. I usually have it to the side, but I thought I'd try this and see. There have been some comments over the years about various microphones when I've reviewed them, people saying, well, yeah, but it's 5 times the price of this, and it's not even twice as good. Fair enough, difficult to say what twice as good is, but I get the idea. And you may wonder sometimes, are they trying to rip us off? Not necessarily. I came across an article in Sound on Sound magazine, which is a respected music and technology journal. And it's called Making Mics. It's an interview at Austrian Audio. That's the article there. You might be able to get back issues online. I'm not sure how it works. And I hope I'm not infringing any copyright here. I can't see that anyone would be concerned. Really, that's famous last words. The Law of Diminishing Returns. I've heard about this. Here's a quote from online, which says, as investment in a particular area increases, the rate of profit from that investment after a certain point cannot continue to increase if other variables remain a constant. Yeah, I know, I read that a few times. But let me give my analogy for the law of diminishing returns, perhaps, as it's going to apply. I've always enjoyed cycling, and imagine this then, I'm going to cycle for 3 miles on a good bike, good road, flat road, with no wind. If I do it at 10 miles an hour, no worries. Say I want something a bit better, I want to get there more quickly. I would say 20 miles an hour for 3 miles. Well, there's going to be a bit of huffing and puffing, but I would imagine I can make it. Now, I want to get there even sooner. Let me try 30 miles an hour for 3 miles. I read somewhere in a cycling book, and I can't remember the exact numbers, but the person said, I believe, that as you approach 30 miles an hour on a bike, 90% of your effort is spent in wind resistance against the wind. There's no wind, but obviously there's still, but you're moving. So as you approach 30 miles an hour, 90% of your effort goes into that. So in that sense, then there's a kind of diminishing return. Do you want to get there quicker still? You're going to have to pay. That's my analogy. Reading this article, some things struck me, and I'd just like to go through them, if I may. What the gentleman said from Austrian Audio is the most important component of many mics, the capsule, is identical, bought in from a small number of Chinese factories, possibly copies of their Neumann K67 and K47. I've often wondered this because of late, well, for the past many years, there've been inexpensive capacitor microphones, studio microphones, from now as little as 150, round about there, swelling to around the 200 to 400 mark. And I was wondering, how can that be, really? Well, what they're saying is that the very intricate, difficult part, they're specialist Chinese manufacturers, and they copy a good design. And so if you want to build your mic, rather, you can't invest, well, you can, in that. You go and buy off the shelf from these manufacturers, and then you do your electronics, tweak the electronics perhaps, and obviously the body and the colour and all the rest of it, and there's your microphone. But the capsules are very similar at that kind of price point. He gives an example of a he considers a very good design, the AKG CK12. He says it's being discontinued for good reasons. Handmade to incredibly fine tolerances and extremely difficult to manufacture. I'll read that again. Handmade to incredibly fine tolerances and extremely difficult to manufacture. And he said he estimates that the yield was as low as 15%. So all that difficult to manufacture, you have to try your best, I'm sure, and the yield, when you give up, must be after you've done it, I imagine. You test it and think, it doesn't meet our standards. So very wasteful. Well, if you call it waste, very intensive. He said that in the 70s then, AKG replaced the brass ring in the capsule with a nylon ring. He says it didn't sound remotely the same. There's some detail in the article of the things they tried to replace and what was going on and different things they were trying and the mount and all the rest of it. But he said even just a nylon ring didn't sound remotely the same. I think, why is that then? Well, he says they've obviously copied this design to some extent, it would seem. He said Austrian Audio made many changes and now we can recreate it in production stably enough to get a yield of 80 to 90%. That's what they've done. He says they've developed a laser tool to measure the critical distance between the diaphragm and the backplate. He says that's critical. And it's about the width of a human hair, I read somewhere. So imagine as you're manufacturing as well, if there's any human hair gets in there, you're in trouble. If one gets to the edge and you don't notice, it will work. But so they manufacture them in ultra clean rooms, no fluids, no dust, as best they can. They've got an extractor and all that kind of thing, you can imagine. He mentions that the sensitivity of the capsule is a function of this distance and the polarization voltage that's being applied. So we're starting to hear about the electronics being crucial here. And he says that they've got them sufficiently consistent that you don't need to order a matched pair if you're going to use stereo, because they're as near as the same as a matched pair would be anyway, all of them. So that's how precise they are. He's talking about consistency of polar pattern. That's another thing. You've got to have a polar pattern, and that's done with automotive grade fabrics, and however that's done, I don't know. But there's a lot of looking into that too, and getting a consistent polar pattern. As you can imagine, testing. They go on to say that there's an advantage to building your own capsule because you can tweak it for different applications. So I think what they're saying is, they mentioned that you can get one for vocals, you get a good capsule, good design, and you can manufacture it reliably. It's good. Then you could use it for an instrument mic or a vocal mic, and you could tailor it in the process of manufacturing because you're doing it to optimize them for that particular use. I imagine if you buy one capsule from China or wherever outside, then you're not going to be taking the capsule apart and tweaking the actual capsule itself because you haven't got the skill or the equipment. That's why you're buying them out there. You could tweak the electronics to try and replicate whatever it is you're after, which I think is mostly what goes on. He then goes on to talk about the second part, which is, of course, the electronics, amplifying it to make a good signal. There's a lot of art in this as well, and we have a great engineering team who are doing astonishing things on fast circuitry. It's interesting he says fast circuitry. So like maybe with the Earthworks, which are known for being fast, the electronics have got to keep up as well. If you've got a huge bandwidth, the electronics have got to be able to handle that in a linear fashion as well, I imagine. No distortion. Are you introducing hiss? The physical design of the housing. This needs to be as acoustically transparent as possible, whilst still protecting the capsule from dust and wind, and the electronics from radiated interference. We start with the mechanics and then move on to the electronics. So there, you can imagine that as well, and particularly for vocal mics, where we've talked about this before, where you're going to get a lot of popping. Nothing you can do about that. That's the nature of the beast. Acoustically transparent as possible, but it's got to stop the pops too. So to me then, there's much more. I'm reading this article. I kind of knew, not quite like that, and there's more than that, I'm sure. So maybe that's why, as you start to push the boundary, you get this, it's costing more and more, but it's not twice as good. No, it's just incrementally, like going from 30 miles an hour to 33. It's not twice as good, but the effort that's got to go into it. Yeah, and change is, I don't know, making the capsule easier to manufacture. You've got to, haven't you? And hopefully you'd look for increased profit, and you could sell it at a lower price, which is going to be win-win. Sometimes people think, oh, it's just profit, but you can see, get some idea of where do you draw the line and what matters to you. If that last 2% doesn't really matter to you, you can't even hear it, then probably why go there? So I found that interesting. It's been quite sobering, and I'm less inclined to be a bit grumpy with some of the mics that come my way and their performance, unless I feel somebody's having a laugh. See you next time.